When the trial finally began, the entire country was already on edge. The case had become impossible to ignore, not only because the victim was a police officer, but because the accused were also police officers, men and women who had sworn to protect the city. Now, they were sitting in court, accused of murder. It was a betrayal that struck at the heart of the public. The courtroom itself felt heavy. The air was thick with anticipation. Every seat was taken. Journalists filled the rows, notebooks open, cameras ready. They knew this case would make headlines for weeks. The families of the victim and the accused sat in silence. Their faces showed exhaustion, grief, and fear. They were waiting for answers, but also for closure. For the first time, the world would hear the full story. The prosecution began their presentation carefully, step by step. They didn't rush. They wanted the truth to be undeniable. They brought forward the evidence that had been gathered for months. The phone records, the messages, the deleted conversations that investigators had managed to recover. Each message painted a clearer picture of the relationship between Rosa and Albert. They weren't just communicating. They were obsessing. They were planning. They were escalating. The prosecution showed how Rosa and Albert had been in constant contact in the days leading up to the murder. Not just casual messages, not just normal conversations, but messages filled with jealousy, rage, and obsession. The tone was aggressive. The words were sharp. It was clear that Rosa was not only controlling the relationship, she was controlling Albert. The prosecution argued that Rosa had planned the murder, that she had manipulated Albert, that she had convinced him to kill Pedro, and that the fire was meant to erase all traces, to make the crime look like an accident, to hide the truth. But the defense didn't stay quiet. They immediately tried to turn the story around. Rosa's lawyers painted a different picture. They argued that Rosa was being used, that Albert was the real mastermind. They described him as unstable, obsessive, and dangerous. They said Rosa was terrified of him, that she had been forced into silence. They claimed she was a victim of manipulation. Albert's defense also tried to shift blame. They argued that Rosa had been the one who orchestrated everything, that Albert had acted out of fear and love, that he wasn't in control of his actions. But the evidence kept piling up. The prosecution presented witness statements that described the toxic triangle in detail. Colleagues who had seen arguments, friends who had heard threats, people who described Rosa's emotional control over Albert. They spoke about the jealousy, the tension, the way Rosa seemed to dominate him. They described how the relationship was unstable and dangerous. The most powerful testimony came from those who described the behavior of both suspects before and after the murder. They talked about how they tried to act normal, how they tried to keep their jobs, how they continued their lives as if nothing had happened. That was the most chilling part. A murder so cold, and yet so ordinary. They had returned to work. They had smiled. They had acted like nothing had changed, like the burning car and the dead body didn't exist. The prosecution also revealed another crucial detail: the amount of planning involved. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated execution. The trial continued for weeks. Every detail was examined. Every contradiction was analyzed. The judge listened carefully. The jury weighed the evidence, and the public waited. Then came the moment that changed everything. The court heard the audio recordings of Albert's confession. He described the crime in chilling detail. He spoke about how Pedro was lured, how he was shot, how the car was driven to the remote location, how the fire was started. His voice was broken. He sounded like a man who knew he had crossed a line that could never be undone. But he also sounded like a man who still believed he was protecting someone. Albert's confession was a turning point because it confirmed that Rosa was involved. It confirmed that this was not a random act. This was a planned execution, and it also revealed something even more disturbing: that Rosa had not only wanted Pedro dead, she had wanted him erased from her life completely. That she wanted to remove him as a problem, as a threat, as a person standing between her and the life she wanted. The trial reached its final stage. The prosecutor made his closing statement. He spoke about the manipulation, the lies, the betrayal. He reminded the jury that the evidence was clear: the messages, the confession, the planning, the brutality. Then the defense gave their final speech. They tried to convince the jury that Rosa was innocent, that she was a victim, that Albert acted alone. But the damage had already been done. The evidence was too strong. The story was too consistent. And the jury knew it. The verdict was announced. Rosa Peral was found guilty of murder. Albert Lopez was also found guilty. The court declared that they had planned the murder together, that Rosa had manipulated Albert, that he had acted as her accomplice. The sentence was severe, a punishment meant to reflect the brutality of the crime. But the case didn't end there. Because after the verdict, the story still continued to haunt people. Rosa continued to deny her involvement. She maintained that Albert acted alone. She claimed she was innocent, but the evidence was clear. The messages, the lies, the confession, the cold execution, and the burned body. It was impossible to ignore. The case became one of the most notorious scandals in Spanish law enforcement history. A love triangle that ended in murder. A story of obsession, manipulation, and betrayal. And a reminder that the most dangerous people are not always strangers. Sometimes they are the ones closest to you, people you trust, people who wear a uniform, people who should protect you. But instead, they destroy you. If you enjoyed this story and want more true crime cases told in detail, subscribe and like the video. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying crimes are the ones that seem impossible to explain.